Breadbox Media programming is brought to you by...
Hello, this is international Catholic singer Anna Nuzzo, inviting you to join me and Father Dan Cambra of the Marian Fathers on a select international tour's Divine Mercy pilgrimage to Poland and the Czech Republic. It takes place in September of 2019, and we would love for you to join us. For more information, go to my website, annanuzzo.com. Thank you, and God bless.
Looking for the perfect First Communion, Confirmation, or RCIA gift? Consider a beautiful, heirloom quality, made-in-Italy rosary from Ghirelli. A Ghirelli rosary will be prayed with and cherished forever, guaranteed. Shop Ghirelli today. That's GHIRELLI.com. Introducing the redesigned CatholicSingles.com, featuring new ways that put the spotlight on the person and their faith, not just a profile picture. For the past 20 years, faithful Catholics have used CatholicSingles.com, and the reimagined CatholicSingles.com website is ready to help single Catholics take the next step in sharing meaningful relationships with other faithful Catholics. Remember, CatholicSingles.com for faith, fellowship, and love.
Well, hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Lisa, Hendey, and Friends. I'm, as usual, having an awesome week. Actually, as you listen to this week, at the moment that this podcast is dropping, I'm going to be winging my way to Gulfport, Mississippi. So if you're listening on Tuesday, send up some prayers for safe travels and smooth connections as I head out to be with my parents for an extended amount of time. So I'm so grateful for those who've reached out with prayers for my mom and just everything that's going on in our family. And speaking of family, today we have a great family conversation on the podcast. Our guest today is Alan Migliorato, who is the author of a fabulous book called The Manly Art of Raising a Daughter. Alan has been married since 1993 and he's parented 3 daughters. He owns a sign and advertising company based in Orlando and has a certification in youth ministry from the University of Dayton. He's the founder of Adventure Catholic Leadership Formation Training and proudly, I think this is super awesome, achieved the rank of Eagle Scout and is a veteran of the United States Army. Welcome to the podcast, Alan.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Oh, it's a gift. And, you know, I was interested when your book crossed my desk a few weeks ago to have this conversation. But before we dive into talking about the book, one of the things that I always like to ask my guests is just to tell us a little bit more about your story. So tell us a little bit about Alan's
My story.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure where to start with that. Let's see. Was born at a very young age in Ohio. I moved to Florida with my parents. My dad was a professional boxer. My mom is a hairstylist, so pretty blue collar grassroots family. Grandfather was a steel worker. Grandmother was a seamstress, and so I married my wife, and she is. She's a housewife right now, but she was in college when we met, and we met at my best friend's wedding. She was the maid of honor. I was the best man. I can't think of the word, but the best man. And that's, we had 3 daughters, and here I am.
That's so awesome. A professional boxer. I should know with a last name like Migliorato that there's got to be an interesting story there. That's amazing.
Yep.
And how long was your tour in the military?
I was in for only 2 years. I got injured. I hurt my back pretty bad, and so I'm disabled veteran now. Living in Florida with my wife and 3 daughters, and have a business, but I'm limited to what I can do physically at times. But I hire people to help me with those things. But God's got a plan for everything, and so you got to look at even the down times where you feel that you're down, that God's got something better coming your way.
Amen to that. I want to thank you for serving, and to your family too for that sacrifice, and just for all that you've done for our country. So let's dive into talking about the book, The Manly Art of Raising a Daughter. So where did the inspiration come for this book and the timing of it right now?
That's a great question. So my daughters right now are 15, 18, and 21. And raising them, they all still live, with me. My oldest daughter is going to college, and she works at Universal Studios. She has her AA degree in hospitality management. And so she wants to be, work at Universal. My middle daughter is getting ready to go to college in August, and my youngest daughter is a sophomore. And they're all connected well with the church. And since I work with a lot of teens in the youth group that I'm a mentor in, I see a lot of absentee fathers, and not just that are not in the house. I mean, sometimes they're at home and they're still absent. And these girls experience a lot of problems that my own girls don't necessarily experience because I'm present with them. I'm not saying I've done everything right, because I'm sure if you asked me, my wife would have about a 3-hour conversation with you telling you if I've not done everything right. But that's part of being a man, part of being a father, is that, you make mistakes, but you do it with love. There's never any malice or malintent. You always try to do the best for your children. But what I see with these other girls that I mentor is that a lot of them take the wrong route, and it's a lot of times for attention, because they need a masculine man, head of the household at home, with a loving hand to guide them, to get them in the right place in life, so that and keeping a focus on God. And they're missing that. These girls that I mentor are missing that, and so they get into all these things, these bad relationships, these horrible events happen to them because they're trying to get attention. And I know a lot of men that I considered friends at one point, and that I've had to distance myself from, and try to lead by example, because they don't listen to the words, that they cheat on their wives. They have girlfriends on the side. They never talk to their children. It breaks my heart. I mean, it's one of those things where I'm probably as masculine as you can probably imagine. There's not really anything feminine about my persona. And when I see a man that thinks it means to be a man, because they have, they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. So when I see men that are doing things that are causing their daughters to take the wrong route, to look for attention elsewhere, I think men need this book, because they need to know how to raise their families with a focus on God, and doing so with the masculinity that God gave them from birth, without being afraid to do so.
Yeah, this is, it's interesting. Well, let me tell you, first of all, I'm a self-proclaimed daddy's girl. I'm 55. I'll be 56 in June. And I still, the man who has had the most influence on my life, aside from Jesus, who is God and man, is my dad. Certainly my husband is my best friend and my go-to confidant and everything. But, I'm so blessed that I was raised by a man who took his vocation to fatherhood so seriously. And so when I was reading your book, I'm the mother of 2 sons. And I was kind of putting myself back to, my childhood as my dad's daughter, and seeing it through the prism of that, and understanding, how his influence on me has had so much of an impact on the woman that I am. So I'm kind of curious about if you had any trepidation at all in today's kind of, I don't want to talk about politics, but in the climate that we live in, where, the Me Too thing has been so visual, and so many kind of challenges in some of our gender relationships. If this was something that you ever thought, wow, am I really going to put a book out with this title? Is this going to cause problems? Or did you just feel completely confident that this was the right thing to do?
As far as like being a man for my family, is that what you're?
Well, I guess if I were a man in today's world and I were so bold as to come out with a book with the title "The Manly Art of Raising a Daughter," I'm reacting to the title, which I know maybe you didn't craft, but as a woman and having seen the inside of the book, I think it's absolutely wonderful. But I think that there could also be some people out there, and even men among them, who now think, maybe this is a topic that we don't need to take on. And I'm not saying that from a personal perspective. I'm just saying in today's world, it can be a challenging thing to talk about the differences between men and women.
Sure. I see what you're asking. I'm sorry. No, I never get offended, honestly, at just about, I can't think of anything that would really offend me. A lot of times it's just misunderstandings where, and Pope Francis runs into this, where Pope Francis will make a statement and people take it the wrong way. I mean, if he spent all day worrying about how people took what he is saying, I mean, I don't think that he'd have time to do things that he needs to be doing for his office. So, I'm really not too worried about if people are going to look at the title of the book and say, oh, he's going to be a feminist, anti-feminism, and he's going to say that women belong in the kitchen and that, daughters need to, to stay barefoot and stay with that, then they're missing out on a great book, because that's absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm saying that a man, being a man in a family, is more than about exerting force. It's not about being physically forceful with your wife. It's about loving her like you love the church. It's about showing your daughters that they need to expect this type of treatment from a man later on in their life.
I'm so happy that you answered it. That is exactly what I got when I was reading the book, and so I'm glad that that you were able to express it in that fashion. And I love the analogy to the kind of hits that Pope Francis takes sometimes. So the other thing that I wanted to ask about before diving into kind of the guts of the book is I have written books on being a Catholic mother, and I know you kind of expressed this a little bit when we were talking earlier. I know for me, when I wrote my first book, The Handbook for Catholic Moms, that I wanted to put a big red letters on the cover. I do not think I am the perfect mom. I'm trying to learn my way as I go through this, and so I'm wondering about for you in your relationship with your wife and daughters. It's a pretty personal book, and you share, a lot of your family stories. So what kind of buy-in did you get from your family before you set off to publish the book? I told my daughters, I said, I'm writing a book, and I said, I had a few different titles in mind, and they all like this one the best. And so they chirped in, but my daughters they said, oh my gosh, you're telling the story about that's so personal. And I said, I want you to think of it this way. I said, if you really don't think that would help somebody to read the stories that I'm putting in the book, then I won't put it in there, because I don't want to do anything that's gonna hurt you. I said, but I want you to think about this and pray about it, because there's some personal stories, as you said in the book, and I don't go into expressive detail and drawn out stories, but there are personal things that I talk about my daughters and my relationship, where they're hard because they're failures of mine, where I've failed, in my opinion, as a father, and so they're hard for me to read over and over again. They're hard for me to see, and I think a lot of men will relate to that. But I had support from my family, for the book, and they're all proud. As a matter of fact, my daughter, one of my daughters had a sleepover, which we always have somebody at our house, it seems like, where I probably need an extra couple of bedrooms for all the girls that end up at our house. But that's fine, they're welcome. And a couple of their friends saw one of my books sitting on the counter, and they're like, you wrote this? And I was like, oh yeah. And several of them asked, can I take this and give this to my dad? And sure, take it and give it to him Father's Day, or, it's something where I feel very supported at home. That's fantastic.
I don't think I would have written it. If I wasn't supported, I don't think I would have written it.
That's fantastic. So getting into kind of the format of the book, so you have a variety of different topics that you take on. And one thing that I really like about it is both the kind of personal narrative that you share, and then you kind of go into the mode of challenging your reader. And in every chapter, you end with two consistent themes, which is a section of take action. It's some like actual kind of action points that you can do, and then challenge yourself. And that is basically something that, maybe your reader would have to go exactly what you say, challenge yourself, do something that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Why do you think it was important to include those two sections in every chapter?
Well, that's again, what a great question. I'm going to tell you before I answer that. I've done several interviews, but before our interview, you stopped and prayed, and I can't tell you how much I respect that and appreciate that you took the minute that it took to do that. Nobody else has done that when we've done interviews, and I really appreciate you doing that, because
thank you.
It invites God into our conversation, and I think your listeners need to know that you're doing right, and you have a great mission there. So other than that, I think it's important to challenge yourself as a man, because a lot of times we see wrong, and not obviously when I say as a man, there are families where the man is just not present, for whatever reason, and the woman is raising her daughters or her son by herself. There's horrible situations that happen that beyond your control at times. I still believe that you need a man in the family, but sometimes there's just nothing you can do to rectify that situation. It doesn't mean that all hope is lost. Get your daughters involved in good youth groups and with good mentors that can fill that role and help. But I think it's important to challenge yourself as a man, because a lot of times we just sit and look at an injustice happening, but we don't take action. We don't speak up. We're afraid to do the wrong thing. And I would rather do the wrong thing a dozen times than do nothing. So I think it's so important for us as men that are going to lead our families toward God to take action. We can tell you a story all day, but when I'm experiencing something, it's very different than just reading a book or hearing a homily. Get out in the world and experience God's love, and show your daughter that that I'm uncomfortable. That's where growth happens, is when you're uncomfortable, and I'm doing things to better my family. But pride gets in the way so many times.
Yeah, that's really significant. And I think what it transforms this book into is something that it's not going to be something that you sit and read once and then put on your bookshelf. It really will, if you use it in the way that's intended, become sort of a manual for you to kind of work through and work not only on your relationship with yourself, but more importantly on your relationship with God, which is where you start in chapter 1 with the chapter entitled Introduce Her to God. And I mean, it kind of makes sense that you would start there, but say a little bit about what that particular chapter meant to you to write.
So I put that, the Introduce Her to God is chapter 1 for a very specific purpose, because if you read every other chapter and you're doing everything else right, and you don't have a focus on God, then it doesn't matter what you do. So you have to keep that focus on God, because naturally things will fall into place. If you're talking to her about dressing modestly, or the type of boys to avoid, or the type of boys that she should be, that she should be interested in, and the reason that these boys are interested in her, without that focus on God, there's no foundation, there's no cornerstone, so to speak, for that, for the building block, so above it. So you have to have a focus on God, and that is the most important thing in my life and in my family's life. I can't tell you how many. My oldest daughter stopped working at a job because they told her she wasn't going to get a raise if she wasn't able to put in at least 1 or 2 Sundays a month. And she said, okay, well then this is not the place for me, because my church is important to me, and that's my family day. Mm-hmm. So that's an important tool to teach, our daughters at a young age is, look, it's Sunday. This is the Lord's day. This is your day of rest. Even God took a day to rest. So you need to get to church, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. We're not going to whine. We're going to get in the car, and I can't remember the last time I've really been blessed that, that my family has said, we just don't feel like going to church. I don't ever remember that happening, because at a young age, I instilled in them with my wife that this is what we do. We're going to church, and get in the car. And, if you have a soccer game or something like that, well, either it falls into where we can go to church after or before, or if my middle daughter, when she played basketball, was on, in tournaments all over the U.S., and we would go to church on Sundays, and there was times where we didn't go to the game, even in a different state, on a Sunday, because we were going to church.
And that is an opportunity for other families to see yours and think, okay, they're really standing by what they say. So that's a great place to start. Some of the other, I wish I could go through every chapter, but I can't. Some of them really stuck out to me. You mentioned the one on modesty, and I just kind of giggled at your story that you shared about going shopping with your daughter for her first school clothes when she was going to public school. Just say a couple words about, how dads can mentor their daughters with respect to modesty.
Oh, sure. There's so many dads that I see, walking around, and they'll be checking out a girl that's half dressed, walking through the mall with their daughter, and their heads are getting whiplash because they're looking at a girl with things hanging out that shouldn't be hanging out, and and their daughters see that, and so if that attracts my dad, who I look up to, then maybe that's what attracts other men as well, and boys my age or a man my age. I remember when I was young, this is what my dad looked at, and so this is what I'm going to dress like. And of course, this isn't a conscious thought. This is a very subconscious thought. But they tend to follow. Girls tend to follow what their father likes, and so you've got to be so careful. It's such a big job being a dad, If you're telling your daughter to dress modestly and you're going in the other room and you're looking at porn, or if you're going to a strip club that night and out with the guys, that's the kind of guy that she's going to expect in her life someday. Mm-hmm. So however you treat your wife, your daughter is going to look for a man that treats her exactly the same way.
Can I tell you something that my dad used to do when we were little? So we went to Catholic school, and we didn't have a large clothing budget for extra clothes. We had our uniforms, and every once in a while there would be an occasion that we would get a special dress for, like, for example, Easter. We're coming up to Easter. And so my dad, this was so wonderful. When we would come home from shopping, my mom would have us put on our dresses, and my dad would sit on the couch in the living room, and we would get all dressed up in our new outfits, and we would have a fashion show for him, and we would each come out into the room and twirl around in our dress, and he would tell us, how beautiful we are and how wonderful we looked and how precious we were going to be when we went to mass in those outfits. And it was such a gift to, I'd say, to my self-esteem, even when you're going through those awkward phases, that, to have your dad kind of pause and affirm that you are wonderfully made. You are, made for something so special, and that you should never compromise with respect to anything, because God made you for such a special purpose. It was a great gift that he gave us. So.
Lisa, you just described last weekend at my house. I mean, we do the exact same thing. And I hadn't gone shopping. They went shopping together on Friday. My two younger daughters, my middle daughter, my younger daughter, and my wife. And they bought a dress on a sale rack that was kind of questionable. Mm-hmm. And so they came out, and my daughter said, "I have one more dress I want you to see." So she went, and I do the same thing. "Oh, you look very pretty. That's very nice. It looks nice with your hair, with your eyes." And I never lie to them if it's something that I and they know. Don't ask me if you don't want to hear the truth. So if it looks great, I tell them, that looks great. If it does not, and I'll say, is that the style that you wanted, or is that, I'm not sure if I like the way that fits. I said, but if you're comfortable in it, that's different. But there was one dress that almost it wasn't a bikini top, but it had like a tie in the front where it had a very, like a 2-inch circle, like right in the center of the chest, below a part that was open, so you could see like the skin, or if she had a bra there, you could see the bra strap. So my youngest daughter came out with this dress on, And out of the corner of my eye, I see my wife and my middle daughter just kind of smirking. Like, I don't know if they bought it as kind of like an April Fool's kind of thing, or but it wasn't something that they would normally have bought. And my youngest daughter, she goes, "What do you think about this? I'm thinking I'm going to wear this to school on Monday." And I said, well, if that's the image you want to give out, I said, that's a little surprising. And she goes, "No, I'm just joking, Dad." She's like, I'm going to sew this different, piece of fabric in here to make it different. And I said, "No, I mean, if that's the image." She goes, "Dad, that's not how I am. I'm not going to do that." She goes, "But I know a lot of girls that would wear this to school." And I said, "Well, luckily, you're not a lot of girls. You're just one in your mind."
That's precious. Well, so another chapter that really got my attention was the chapter on dating. And you describe kind of the role that a father can play. And it's interesting that some of the things that you say in that chapter, with respect to kind of things to teach your daughter about her relationship with men, and you call it kind of warning signs about people to avoid. So say a little bit about this and why it's so significant that dads at least pay attention to who their daughters are seeing on dates.
So when you were young and dating, I'm sure that anybody that was flattering and who was attractive, those guys gained the gold stars, right?
Oh yeah.
But those are the ones that you're like, "Oh, Dad, this guy's he's in theater at school. He's got the role in all the plays, or he's the smartest guy in school, or he's the best athlete in school." Those things, obviously, those are going to be some of the attraction points where these are the guys that are up front, where you can see them easier. So anytime that you have flattery coming toward you, just take it with a grain of salt, because it doesn't mean it's not true. If somebody says you're beautiful, you are beautiful. But what is he looking at that's beautiful? And you don't have to give every guy the third degree. Just be aware of, this guy thinks I'm beautiful. Oh, that's so nice. He thinks I'm beautiful. Okay? And if all he ever tells you is you're pretty, what else is there? So
right. What about my brain or my heart?
What about your brain? Yeah. What about your soul? Does he go to church? So it's funny to hear, because my daughters will all look for in the youth group the other night. We were talking, and somebody was doing a proclaim of the night, and my youngest daughter was sitting up front, and the lady that was doing the talk said, "What do you look for in somebody like a boyfriend?" And my daughter raised her hand. The lady came over to her with the microphone, and my daughter said, "He's got to be Catholic. The first thing, he's got to love God, and he's got to be Catholic." And so, like, those are important things. Like, I'm not pushing that on them, but these are things that they see, that they want in their lives. They don't want somebody who's going to treat them bad. Now, my middle daughter, I'll tell you a quick story. My middle daughter did have a boyfriend for about maybe 2 months, 3 weeks. It was about 3 weeks where they were kind of interested before that, and then not after, but totally about 3 weeks, who was a self-proclaimed atheist, right? Mm-hmm. And so I said, "Well, it's interesting." She goes, "You don't like him, do you?" And I said, "Well, no." I said, "I'm not going to lie, because you've asked me a question, and no, I don't." And she said, "Okay, well, more importantly, why don't you like him? Is it because he's an atheist?" I said, "No." I said, "Andrea," I said, "a lot of people are confused. A lot of people are confused." I said, "What I don't like about this particular boy," I said, "is every time that he comes over to our house, he doesn't look me in the eye and doesn't say hi to me." And she was surprised that was the one thing that she thought, no matter what, this kid's an atheist, I'm not going to like him. I said, "No." I said, "I don't like that, that about him, of course." I said, "But you're there, and you're probably dating this boy for what reason?" And she goes, "Well, I think if he just got to know God, that would be something that I could be the one to bring him to God." And I said, "Well, do you feel that you need to date him to do that?" And she said, "Well, no." She goes, "I just think he's cute too." And I said, "Okay, well, fine." I said, "So I'm not going to tell you not to date somebody. I said, I just want you to be aware of these things." And so as she got to kind of open her own eyes and see that was a failure that she experienced, that she grew from, because he was not after the right things. He was not acting like the right kind of person. But a lot of kids today, will proclaim, "Oh, I just don't believe in God." It's more of a popular thing for them to say, I think, than they really mean it. And so my kids know that too, and they're pretty well formed. And so they, when they have friends that say that, they'll bring them to church with them. well, you've never met God, so come to church with me, and then you can tell me you don't believe in him. And we've had some great success stories with that too. Some kids have really changed heart over the years.
I sort of like that you delineated there. I certainly had relationships as a young woman where it was like, okay, well, some things are really great about this person and some things aren't, and I can fix that person. And ultimately, right. I think we learn the lesson that the only person we can really fix is ourselves. And so, if there are major glaring things that you don't want to compromise on, kind of, dating is part of discerning, prayerfully discerning what your life is going to be like. So that's a great story. There's so many awesome chapters, and one that the last one I wanted to ask you about was this chapter on social media, because this is probably, for our age that we're living in right now, one of the greatest parenting challenges. And it's interesting that in this, before kind of going into too much else, you really acknowledge that this was a problem for yourself, your own use of social media. And I think that's a case for a lot of us parents that, we can say, oh, my kids are, watching too much YouTube or whatever. And it's like, then when we use the screen time app on our iPhone to assess our own use of technology, we see, wow, this is something I struggle with too. Why does it matter that a parent who wants to monitor their kids' social media starts first with their own usage?
Well, we all lead by example, right? So if I can't tell my kids don't do this, and then they turn their head and I'm doing it. So I'll tell you how much time it slips away. Like, that is the only thing in life that we have that we can't get back is time. And so you've got to be so careful with the amount of time that you put into these things. I didn't realize how much I was on social media, but you've got Facebook and Instagram and whatever, Snapchat and Snapface or whatever else they have in the world today. There's so many different names for it, and there's always a new one coming out. Well, to stay connected to your family, sometimes it's necessary to use it at times, but it's not necessary, and we fool ourselves by saying that it is. It's really not necessary to use it as often as we do. And so I wrote the book, The Manly Art of Raising a Daughter, in 30 days. And I stopped using social media and I started writing the book the next day. And every time I was going to go on social media, I would write. And it took 30 days to write it.
Wow.
And that to me it's a lot of, it was like, holy cow, like, look what I got done. And so I started writing some other things too. I have a couple other books that I'm working on, and one other book as well that's self-published. And all of these things have happened in that short period of time where I stopped. And I'm not even on social media now. I have employees that go on for my business, and they'll do that for me, but I don't go on myself. I don't remember the last time I was on one of these things, other than sometimes my wife will post pictures on her Facebook account, and I'll go on to download them to my phone and then get off, because that's easier than having her text all of them to me. But other than that, like, I don't really, and this is going to sound horrible, I really don't care what somebody ate for dinner or where they are on vacation. If they want to talk to me, then let's talk. I'm happy to meet with you, and we'll have lunch, and I'll buy you lunch. Let's sit down and talk. But just to kind of, get a 5-second glimpse of your life and think I can really know you is a dangerous route to take. So it's disconnecting.
Yeah, and it's not in this chapter, but you actually talk about this on the chapter of kind of preparing your daughter for her boyfriends and beyond. There's just one paragraph that I want to read for our readers, because I think it gives a little bit of a flavor of this book. You say, when it comes to spending time with your daughter, the most important bit of advice I can offer is to put your phone down. Be present to your daughter. The time you spend with her now is important to her. She needs to know that you are interested in her and in her life. So I think that gives you a little flavor for the great wisdom and the manly art of raising a daughter. Alan, is there anything that any kind of closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
I really don't have anything other that we haven't talked about. I want you to know that I really appreciate the person you are. I've read some of the things that you've written as well, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me about my book. it's an honor to be on your show.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So the book, again, is The Manly Art of Raising a Daughter. We'll have links in our show notes to purchase this through Sophia Institute Press. They put out so many great resources, and you won't be able to connect with Alan Migliorato on social media, but I'll make sure that you have all the information that you need about his ministry and this great book, The Manly Art of Raising a Daughter. Alan, please say thank you to your wife and your daughters for sharing you with us today, and may God really bless the work that you're doing out there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
So, friends, that's it for this week's episode of Lisa Hendey and Friends. We are going to actually take a little break next week. I'm taking Holy Week and Easter week off, so we'll be back with a podcast that I know you're really going to be interested in the following week. But you'll have a week off from this episode, and it's a week that we should all be just kind of preparing for the beauty of the Easter and getting our hearts ready for Holy Week and everything. And so just enjoy the quiet and turn everything off and just be with Jesus next week. That's the best advice I can give. So as usual, I want to thank everybody for your feedback. And just if you like the show, go ahead and share it with somebody. That's a great gift. And be sure to say thank you to my friends over at Breadbox Media, who are one of the main reasons that I'm able to do the podcast each week. And just keep me in your prayers, if you would, especially for my mom and dad, Ann and Pat. Until next week, have an awesome week, friends. Bye-bye.
Breadbox Media programming is brought to you by Jack Kane Ford. Find your next Ford Tough vehicle at caneford.com. CMF Curo is the country's first Catholic healthcare ministry to provide an affordable health sharing solution rooted in Catholic teaching and community. Learn more at mycatholichealthcare.com/podcast. That's mycatholichealthcare.com/podcast.